A very good morning. It's just past 8 this Wednesday morning and we're back again with Breakfast News. I'm Rukma and with me is Shubhendu. A very good morning to you, Shubhendu.
Good morning, Rukma.
And over the next 1 hour, we'll be taking a look at all the top stories making headlines across India and the world. In international news, we'll be touching up on the latest in Afghanistan, besides news from other parts of the globe, also news on health, sports and much, much more.
Absolutely. Good morning and warm welcome to Breakfast News. As Rukma mentioned, that special focus on the situation in Afghanistan where Taliban's government formation is taking place. In fact, it has been announced an interim government. Also back home, we'll take a review of the flood situation as it prevails in Assam and Bihar in particular. All that and lots more. Let's begin with the top stories.
In a landmark achievement, India's COVID-19 vaccination coverage crosses 70 crore landmark milestone. Union Health Minister Mansukh Mandavia congratulates healthcare workers and people of India.
Global national reforms needed for a more just world in the wake of COVID-19, says Lok Sabha Speaker Om Birla at the 5th World Conference of Speakers of Parliament in Vienna.
Vice President Venkaiah Naidu calls for launching massive multimedia campaigns in local languages involving celebrities and icons to create awareness about eye donation.
First, India-Japan high-level policy dialogue held virtually on Tuesday discusses issues on air pollution, sustainable technologies, transports, climate change, marine litter and fluorocarbons.
Taliban announces interim government in Afghanistan, names Mullah Muhammad Hassan Akhund as head of Council of Ministers. Afghan resistance reacts to Taliban government formation, calls it illegal.
And in sports, giant killer Leylah Fernandez topples Svitolina 6-3, 3-6, 7-6 to reach US Open semi-finals. In men's single, Daniil Medvedev beats Botic-Wan Zhang to reach the semi-finals. Those were the top stories. Let's now look at the stories in detail.
And as we were telling you, in a landmark achievement, our COVID-19 vaccination coverage has crossed the 70 crore milestone. 70 crore 63 lakh 55,796 vaccine doses have been administered across the country so far. More than 67 lakh 43,000 vaccine doses were administered till Tuesday 7 p.m. Union Health Minister Mansukh Mandavia congratulated the entire country and healthcare workers for the achievement of the 70 crore landmark milestone. The last 10 crore COVID-19 vaccine doses were administered in just 13 days.
Meanwhile, Kerala too witnessed landmarks on the vaccination front on Tuesday. Total vaccination doses administered in the state has crossed 3 crore. On Tuesday, Kerala recorded its highest ever daily vaccination as it administered 7.38 lakh doses of vaccines. The southern state reported 25,772 fresh cases of COVID on Tuesday, when 1,62,428 samples were tested. Some 296 local body wards are still under triple lockdown considering the weekly infection rate. 189 deaths were confirmed as because of COVID. Meanwhile, COVID review meeting under Chief Minister has decided to withdraw both night curfew and Sunday lockdown. Further relaxations are also declared to open training institutes with residential systems for students over the age of 18. Those institutes must follow biobubble systems and students and teachers must have taken at least one dose. From October 4th onwards, all higher education institutes will be open for final year graduate and postgraduate students. However, students and teachers must take at least one dose. Before that, vaccination for final year students and teachers will be taken on priority to ensure at least their first dose by next week.
And moving on, Lok Sabha Speaker Om Birla has said that India has embarked on the world's largest free-of-cost vaccination drive with the ambitious target of inoculating 900 million citizens by 2021 December. Addressing the interactive general debate on the global response to the COVID-19 pandemic's challenges and multilateralism's ability to develop for the people, at the 5th World Conference of Speakers of Parliaments in Vienna, the Lok Sabha Speaker said that India has arranged prompt humanitarian assistance and relief operations and supplied medicines and equipment to over 150 countries. Om Birla also asserted that nations need to learn several lessons from the pandemic.
महामारी के अनुभव से पता चलता है कि सार्वजनिक स्वास्थ्य प्रणाली को अधिक व्यापक और मजबूत बनाने की आवश्यकता है। हमें सभी को, लोकतांत्रिक संस्थाओं को, निर्वाचित प्रतिनिधियों को इसमें सामूहिक रूप से काम करने की आवश्यकता है। अतः आज मैं इस अवसर पर दुनिया के सभी संसदों के पीठासीन अधिकारियों को आह्वान करता हूं कि कोविड-19 महामारी का मुकाबला करने के लिए हमें सबको साथ मिलकर काम करना होगा। एक न्याय संगत और दूरगामी परिणाम प्राप्त करने के उद्देश्य से कार्यनीति बनानी होगी और उसका क्रियान्वयन सुनिश्चित करना होगा।
And Vice President M. Venkaiah Naidu has called for dispelling myths and false beliefs on eye donation, suggested launching of massive multimedia campaigns in local languages in every state by involving celebrities and icons to create awareness among people. Speaking at 36th National Eye Donation Fortnight celebrations, Vice President referred to the huge gap between demand of donor cornea tissues and supply, pointing out that many people were not coming forward for eye donation due to false beliefs. He said if everyone made a pledge to donate their eyes, the entire backlog of cases waiting for corneal transplant could be wiped out. Vice President also stressed the need for a structured eye banking system to bridge the gap between demand and supply by facilitating generations of donor tissues and ensuring their equitable distribution. Vice President lauded the Eye Bank for empowering thousands of people affected with corneal blindness with the gift of vision of the last 5 decades.
People should be made aware that the noble act of donating their eyes would enable people with corneal blindness to see the beautiful world by restoring their vision. If all of us make pledge to donate our eyes, we can treat the entire backlog of cases waiting for corneal transplant.
And the first India-Japan high-level policy dialogue was held virtually yesterday. Union Minister of Environment, Forests and Climate Change, Bhupinder Yadav, and his Japanese counterpart, Koizumi Shinjiro, discussed issues on air pollution, sustainable technologies and transports, climate change, marine litter, fluorocarbons, COP26 and so on. During the meeting, the Environment Minister acknowledged the importance of Indo-Japan bilateral cooperation on environment and appreciated efforts made by Japan towards bringing new technologies into India. He also highlighted the achievements India has made in tackling climate change under the leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The Japanese Environment Minister mentioned that both countries can strengthen bilateral cooperation through the Joint Credit Mechanism, Coalition for Disaster Resilience Infrastructure, and may also explore collaboration in areas endorsed by the G20, especially on climate, environment and energy. Both sides agreed to further strengthen the bilateral cooperation on environment and also to take forward the discussion on JCM.
And Indian Railways will run 261 Ganpati special trains to various destinations for convenience of passengers and to clear the extra rush during the festive season. Central Railway will run 201 trains, Western Railway will run 42 trains, and Konkan Railway Corporation Limited will run 18 Ganapati special trains during the festive season. However, these trains have already started services from the last week of August and will run till 20th September this year. Also, sleeper class coach is augmented in various trains originating from Mumbai to clear the rush. The ministry said only passengers having confirmed tickets will be permitted to board these special trains. Passengers are requested to adhere to all norms, SOPs related to COVID-19 during boarding, travelling and other destination.
National Security Advisor Ajit Doval will today meet his Russian counterpart Nikolai Patrushev in New Delhi. General Nikolai Patrushev is on a two-day visit to India for a high-level India-Russia intergovernmental consultation on Afghanistan. The consultations are a follow-up to the telephone conversation between Prime Minister Modi and Russian President Vladimir Putin on 24th August. This year, the two leaders had expressed the view that it was important for the two strategic partners to work together and instructed their senior officials to remain in touch on Afghanistan. During his visit, the Russian Secretary of the Security Council is expected to call on the Prime Minister and the External Affairs Minister.
And in the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir, Army and Police in a joint search operation in Kirni area of Poonch apprehended one person, namely Jahangir Ali. During search of his personal bag, 2 pistols, 4 Chinese grenades, 100 pistol rounds, 4 pistol magazines were recovered from possession. During investigation, it came to fore that the accused was to hand over the arms and ammunition to Ashrat Khan of Surankot and Sheraz of Sangla, Surankot. These 2 persons have also been apprehended from different places. The trio are associates of proscribed outfit Jammu and Kashmir Ghaznavi Force and were given tasks to carry out terrorist activities in J&K, particularly in District Poonch. In this connection, FIR has been lodged under relevant sections of the law.
On leaving the port of Alexandria in Egypt on the 5th of September, INS Tabar undertook a maritime partnership exercise with ENS Alexandria, a frontline frigate of the Egyptian Navy, in the Mediterranean Sea. The exercise involved multiple activities covering a wide range of naval operations. These included drills for transit through asymmetric threat environment, operations for interdicting suspect vessels at sea, communication procedures, joint development of maritime domain picture and replenishment at sea drills. A highlight of the exercise was the cross-deck halo operations that involved halo recovery procedures and airborne light replenishment drills between the 2 ships. The exercise was significantly beneficial in enhancing interoperability between the 2 navies and widened the scope for combined operations against common maritime threats in the future. The maritime partnership exercise culminated with a steam pass between the 2 ships as per naval custom.
And we're heading for a short break in Breakfast News. There's lots more coming up. Do stay with us.
With the world's largest COVID vaccination drive, India is leading the way. As the vaccine reaches every corner of the nation, do not forget the mantra, Dawai bhi, Kadai bhi. Let's continue our fight against COVID-19. Vaccination along with social distancing, sanitization and masks.
Mask up, India!
Put your mask on and cover your nose and be safe.
Mask Up India.
Welcome back. You're watching Breakfast News, and now let's take a look at the flood situation in the states affected.
Right, first let's talk about Bihar, a population of about 15 lakh in over 1,200 villages in 13 districts are still affected due to floods. The central team has returned to Delhi after assessing the damages caused by the floods. The team visited Bhagalpur, Darbhanga, several other flood-affected areas. Meanwhile, the rail traffic of Barauni-Katihar rail section has disrupted due to erosion of soil beneath the tracks. Due to this, the down line has been closed and the repair work is going on. Many long-distance trains have been rerouted. And our colleague Salman Haider is joining us from Patna with more updates. Salman, good morning. If you could fill us in with the latest on the flood situation in the state of Bihar.
Yes, very good morning to you, Shubhendu and Sukma. The latest update is the number of subdivisions, number of flood-affected subdivisions have come down to 66. It was 73 yesterday. And the water logging, water has receded from many villages in Darbhanga, Muzaffarpur, Gopalganj, Samastipur, Hajipur, etc. So the people are now returning, very gradually returning to their native places, their homes. But yesterday heavy rain has lashed a major flood affected area, and it has threatened further flood like situation in those areas. And the water flow from Kosi and Gandak barrages is also on a rising trend. But the ups and downs are going on, and as you said, the soil has eroded from beneath the rail line in Katihar, Barauni rail section, and the repair work is going on, and soon we hope that the train services will be resumed on this track. Meanwhile, from where the flood water has receded, the sanitation and the cleanliness program is also going on a larger scale. Yes, Shubhendu.
Right, and when we talk about relief and rescue operations, how are they progressing? Meanwhile, also the state had requested for an over 3,000 crore relief package. What is the update on that?
Actually, as you said, the central team has returned to Delhi after having a deep consultation with Chief Secretary of the state, Mr. Tripurari Sharan. The state government, through a PowerPoint presentation, presented their demands of about 3,763 crore rupees, of which the highest demand is from Water Resources Department, as the flood control and other things comes under this department only. So a lot of relief work and community kitchens are being run by the state government. So around 1,400 crore rupees has been demanded from the Water Resources Department. The government is hopeful of getting the adequate relief, so that the relief work is conducted on a full scale. The government is already doing the rescue and relief works, but as the situation has eased out, the number of NDRF and SDRF teams have also been reduced from 29 to 15 only, of which 9 NDRF teams are still engaged in relief works, and 6 SDRF teams are also there to help the people. Yes, Rukma.
Right, many thanks Salman for joining us there and for those detailed updates. Salman Haider, our correspondent, telling us about the latest from Bihar.
And after Bihar, let's now talk about the flood situation in Assam as well.
Well, in Assam, the flood situation in this northeastern state continues to improve as the number of those affected comes down to just 20,000 in about 370 villages under 19 revenue circles in 11 districts. Most of these districts presently do not have any who are affected, even though a few of them are yet to be free of flood waters. 219 villages in Morigao are still in a submerged state, the highest amongst all other districts. Meanwhile, the number of relief camps has also come down to 4. One is in Chidang and 3 in Nagaon districts are sheltering below 400 inmates. Well, a very good morning to you, Kamal. Many thanks for joining us. At this point, the situation in Assam, in comparison to Bihar, continues to improve. So, good news there. Give us the latest overview of the situation.
Yes, Rukma, as you have already mentioned, the situation is improving fast, and it's very good news for the state of Assam. Though we have seen moderate rainfall in isolated places in Assam and also Meghalaya and Arunachal Pradesh, but that is not hampering the situation. It's not, leading any rise in the flood situation so far. And this is the good news. And we have seen drastic changes in this few days. No casualty, no human death have been reported in the last 2 days. And that is also very good news. And the affected people, number of affected people has also come down to almost 20,000. And if we talk about 11 affected districts, out of these, almost 5 districts have no flood-affected people so far. Only few villages are there in a very submerged state. But as far as villages are concerned, affected villages are concerned, yes, Morigao district is having more than 217 villages still in a submerged state. The pace of improvement is very slow in Morigao district because the river water is coming from various sides. And if we go to Golaghat, the number of affected people is highest in that district. It is almost above 10,000 still, and in Morigao, as far as the number of affected people is concerned, it is above 5,000. So these are 2 districts. Situation is little tense so far. Right. But we are expecting, at the way situation is improving and rain has, the people are getting relief from rain also. So definitely we can see more improvement in the days to come.
Right. Kamal, Shubhendu here. As the flood waters recede and the rains have also become less, what kind of reconstruction, rehabilitation work lies ahead for the administration?
Well, for that rehabilitation process, government have to wait for some more time, because the rain might come again as per the prediction of IMD. So definitely in that line also government is working. They are leaving no stone unturned. Even the state government recently, Chief Minister Himanta Biswa Sarma instructed all the district administration, to go for to provide all the facilities, even within a very short period of time, whatever the victims have to get from government as far as a relief. So it has to be provided, and district administration have been empowered to provide relief to the people. They don't have to depend on other higher authorities. And the red tapeism has been, they are trying to ease out the rehabilitation process and reconstruction process. Government is trying all the possible way, they're taking all the possible measures to get relief to the people there. And in that line, government is leaving no stone unturned, and we are hoping that people who have lost their home, they will be rehabilitated very soon. And the way we have seen in earlier years, it will not be happening this time. It will be done in a very speedy way.
Right there, Kamal. Thanks very much for joining us from Guwahati with those updates on the flood situation in Assam.
And now moving on to other news stories.
Let's talk about the BRICS Sherpas meeting. India received praise at the 3rd BRICS Sherpas and Sioux Sherpas meeting, where the members lauded the country for its success in advancing cooperation. Despite the challenges of COVID-19 pandemic, the Sherpas discussed the deliverables of the summit, including the New Delhi Declaration. They adopted the revised BRICS terms for reference for guiding BRICS engagement. Discussions took place in a constructive and cordial atmosphere. BRICS Sherpas reviewed preparations for the upcoming 13th BRICS Summit, to be held on 9 September in a virtual format under chairship of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Brazil's BRICS Sherpa ambassador Sakyu JB, Russia's BRICS Sherpa, Ambassador Sergei Rybakov, China's BRICS Sherpa, Ambassador Ma Zhoshu, and South Africa's BRICS Sherpa, Ambassador Anil Suglal, led their respective delegations.
And as part of India's ongoing chairship of BRICS in 2021, Prime Minister Narendra Modi will chair the 13th BRICS Summit tomorrow in a virtual format. The theme for the summit is BRICS at 15, intra-BRICS cooperation for continuity, consolidation and consensus. India had outlined 4 priority areas for its chairship. These are reform of the multilateral system, counter-terrorism, using digital and technological tools for achieving SDGs, and enhancing people-to-people exchanges. In addition to these areas, leaders will also exchange views on the impact of COVID-19 and other current global and regional issues. The meeting will be attended by the President of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, President of China, Xi Jinping, and President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa. India's National Security Advisor Ajit Doval, President of the New Development Bank, among others, will present reports on the outcomes pursued this year under their respective tracks to the leaders during the summit. This is the second time Prime Minister Modi will be chairing the BRICS summit. Earlier, he had chaired the Goa summit in 2016.
Moving on, in today's episode of the saga of freedom struggle, we will remember how on this day in 1897, Lokmanya Bal Gangadhar Tilak was charged for sedition for his criticism of the British rule. We will also look at the rise in spiritualism in India amidst the waging war against the colonial rulers and observe the death anniversary of Feroz Gandhi.
On this very day in 1897, Lokmanya Bal Gangadhar Tilak was charged for sedition for his criticism of the British rule in his Marathi newspaper named Kesari.
This was an important moment in India's political history, as it marked the criminalization of dissent as a grand spectacle of a political trial.
Tilak was charged for the publication of 2 texts, Shivaji's Utterances, a poem, and an unsigned report on the June 1897 Shivaji festival, at which Tilak spoke.
In 1897, Chapekar brothers shot dead 2 British officers, namely the collector of Pune, Mr. Rand, who was responsible for the plague measures, and a young military officer.
This incident caused intense indignation among the Europeans and in the British government of India. It was pointed out that the murders of the 2 officers were the direct result of the incitement caused by Tilak's speeches and article.
Due to prosecution's narrow legal interpretation, the texts were reduced to mean incitement of feelings of disaffection.
After 6 days of litigation, the jury announced Tilak guilty, and Tilak was sentenced to 18 months of imprisonment.
Incidentally, Tilak was imprisoned thrice under the sedition law by the British.
When the nationalists were waging a war against the colonial rulers, spiritualists lifted the morale of Indians and told the Western world about the greatest philosophy of Hinduism, thus garnering the support of the world for India's freedom.
One such spiritualist, Swami Abhedananda, was born on this date in the year 1866. He was a direct disciple of Swami Ramakrishna Paramhans. Swami Vivekananda sent Swami Abhedananda to the USA.
He went to the USA in 1897 as the head of the Vedanta Society of New York and preached messages of Vedanta and teachings of his guru. For about 25 years, he traveled far and wide to the United States, Canada, Mexico, Japan, and Hong Kong. After attending the Pan-Pacific Education Conference at Honolulu, he returned to India in 1922.
He also crossed the Himalayas on foot and reached Tibet, where he studied Tibetan Buddhism. He left for his heavenly abode on the 8th of September 1939. But his spiritual teachings continue to guide people on their spiritual journey.
Today is the death anniversary of Firoz Gandhi, who was a freedom fighter, journalist and a parliamentarian. Firoz, who was born on 12th of September 1912 in a Parsi family, quit studies to take part in India's freedom struggle.
He was imprisoned in 1930 along with Lal Bahadur Shastri and was lodged in the Faizabad jail for 19 months. Soon after his release, he was imprisoned twice, in 1932 and in 1933.
Firoz Gandhi married Indira Gandhi in 1942. The couple were arrested and jailed in August 1942 during the Quit India movement less than 6 months after their marriage.
Even after being allowed to report on the parliamentary proceedings and against the publication of any such proceedings, having started his career as a scribe, Firoz understood the importance of freedom of the press.
It is because of a private member's bill introduced by Firoz in 1956, it is possible for media to report parliament proceedings. Firoz died in 1960 in Delhi.
And in our next segment, we'll be bringing you news from across the world in Across the Globe. Well, the Taliban has announced the structure of an interim government. It will be headed by Mullah Muhammad Hassan Akhund, who will have 2 deputies, Mullah Baradar and Mullah Abdus Salam. But the declaration took place on a tense day in Kabul, particularly with Afghan civilians protesting against Pakistan's meddling in Afghanistan's internal affairs and women demanding that their freedoms be protected. The protests were met with aerial firing. There were reports of arrests of protesters and journalists covering the protests as well. This comes close on the heels of ISI chiefs meeting with the Taliban leadership in Kabul, and reports of how Rawalpindi helped the Taliban gain control of the last holdout in the Panjshir Valley. Here's more on what happened in Kabul yesterday.
The Taliban's flag and emblem seen on a wall surrounding the US Embassy in Kabul amidst anti-Taliban and Pakistan protests in the city. Perception versus ground reality. Under pressure, the Taliban announced an interim government. Mullah Muhammad Hassan Akhund, the chief of the Taliban's powerful decision-making body Rehbari Shura, has been named as Afghanistan's new head of state. Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, chairman of Taliban's political office in Doha, and Mullah Abdus Salam will work as deputies of Mullah Hassan in the new Taliban government. Taliban founder Mullah Omar's son, Mullah Yaqub as defense minister, Sirajuddin Haqqani as interior minister, Qari Fasiuddin as chief of army staff, Maulvi Amir Khan Mutaki as foreign minister and Mullah Hidayatullah as finance minister. Khairullah Khairkhawai is information minister, Abdul Hakim is minister of justice, Sher Abbas Tanikzai is deputy foreign minister and Zabiullah Mujahid is deputy information minister. Protesters in Kabul chanted for an independent government free of Pakistan influence. No place for Pakistan in Afghanistan was heard. Taliban resorted to aerial firing to disperse protesters. Reports suggest they even arrested several protesters and journalists who were covering these anti-Pakistan rallies in Kabul. Protesters, including women, were seen crouching for cover as gunfire rang out. Even as thousands of anti-Taliban protesters took to the streets of Kabul, a video shared by a Tolo News journalist showed women locked in a basement parking. The protests, which were also to demand that women's rights be maintained, came a day after resistance leader Ahmad Masood urged civilians to join the uprising against the Taliban. On another front, Turkey is working with Qatar and the United States about operating Kabul airport and is in talks with the Taliban, Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu said on Tuesday, adding security at the airport was the main issue. USA has accepted that there are some American citizens who are still in Mazar-e-Sharif.
We've been able to identify a relatively small number of Americans who we believe are seeking to depart from Mazar-e-Sharif with their families. We've been assured, again, that all American citizens and Afghan citizens with valid travel documents will be allowed to leave. And again, we intend to hold the Taliban to that. They've upheld that commitment in at least one instance in the last 24 hours with a family that was able to leave through an overland route.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin are in Qatar to seek the evacuation of Americans and Afghans at risk following the Taliban takeover and to build a consensus among allies on how to respond to the Islamic movement. DD India.
And a humanitarian crisis is unfolding in Afghanistan. The situation continues to be dire in terms of basic services, food, shelter and money. International aid is coming in, but the UN has now appealed for almost $200 million in extra funding for life-saving aid after Taliban's takeover, taking the total sum to over $600 million in aid such as critical food, livelihood assistance and more.
Several families from across Afghanistan desperate for food and shelter have been seeking assistance in Kabul over the last several weeks. The United Nations has appealed for almost $200 million in extra funding for life-saving aid after the Taliban's takeover of the country. The UN Humanitarian Agency, Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs or OCHA said the extra sum meant a total of $606 million in aid was now needed to provide critical food and livelihood assistance to nearly 11 million people and essential health services to 3.4 million in Afghanistan until the end of the year.
Basic services in Afghanistan are collapsing and food and other life-saving aid is about to run out. We urge international donors to support this appeal fast and generously. The high-level event on the 13th is a key opportunity to pledge such support.
On another front, according to the WHO, hundreds of medical facilities in Afghanistan are at a risk of imminent closure as soon as this week. Donors such as the World Bank, the European Union and USAID have withdrawn aid since the Taliban took charge. The WHO is currently struggling to get supplies into the country, such as trauma kits via its main gateway, the Kabul airport. Medical supplies, however, continue to be flown in via the northern city of Mazar-e-Sharif. Putting up a moderate face, the Taliban has allowed university classes to resume and women to attend, but only under strict restrictions on clothing and movement. Women can only attend class if they wear an abaya and a niqab and are separated from men by curtains in the middle of classrooms.
C'est aux universités.
It is up to the universities and teachers to ensure that the degree, the Islamic dress code and respect for Sharia law are respected, and that girls must understand that this is for their own good.
Before we were together to study, we were comrades, and now this curtain. It puts a horrible pressure, but we have no choice.
It's absurd, and even more so. Everything has stopped for us. Many people have left. I feel lonely and desperate.
The Taliban had earlier reassured Afghans in foreign countries that they will not reimpose the brutal rule of their last period in power, which included barring women and girls from public life. But now their actions don't seem to be matching their words. DD India.
And UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said humanitarian aid can be an entry point for dealing with the Taliban as the world body continues its operations in Afghanistan following the US evacuation. In an interview with BCC, the UN Secretary General called on the Taliban to provide the conditions for them to do their work, while acknowledging that the situation remains largely unpredictable.
After the Taliban formed a new government, UN spokesperson Farhan Haq told media in New York only a negotiated and inclusive settlement will bring sustainable peace to Afghanistan.
You know, the UN Secretariat and the UN doesn't engage in acts of recognition of governments. That's a matter that's done by member states, not by us. From our standpoint, only a negotiated and inclusive settlement will bring sustainable peace to Afghanistan. The United Nations remains committed to contribute to a peaceful solution, promote the human rights of all Afghans, notably women and girls, promote sustainable development in line with Agenda 2030, and provide life-saving humanitarian assistance and critical support to civilians in need.
And our colleague Meghna Dev is joining us with more updates on the Afghanistan situation. Meghna, good morning. Now that the interim Taliban government takes over Afghanistan, and there is also outrage amongst the civilians for the alleged Pakistan meddling in the internal affairs of the country, what looks like the road ahead for Afghanistan?
First, Shubhendu, we must, understand this, that it was the 31st of August when, all the U.S. troops withdrew from there, all the, U.S. troops went back from Kabul. And after, it's just been a week after that the interim government in Afghanistan has been formed by the Taliban. And we also see that the Haqqani network has also been given, representation, good representation in the government. Besides that, we can also see that as the Taliban has said that this would be an inclusive government, which actually does not seem so. Besides that, we will also have to see the road ahead, that are the other countries, the Western countries for that matter, ready to engage or just ready to engage but not recognize the government. That is what is to be seen, in the road ahead. Besides that, obviously we had seen that the interference of Pakistan was not taken in good manner by the civilians there in Afghanistan, obviously, because the interference, they were protesting against that interference. We saw the ISI chief, as a report, he went to Kabul and there was an interference in the formation of the government. So the question also arises that is this Afghanistan, is this a Pakistan-driven government there in Afghanistan? That's also a question. Definitely, and that's what people have been protesting against there in Afghanistan. They have been, raising anti-Pakistan slogans there. They were not happy with the interference of Pakistan that has happened, that the thing that is there in the government formation. So definitely, there are these things which have come up. Besides that, Shubhendu, when you asked me about the humanitarian crisis, now there are several kinds of crises currently in Afghanistan and what is also being talked about in the world. First, in Afghanistan, we have seen price rise, very big issue. Women's rights, another issue. We also see a lot of, starvation in the situation. It can lead to a situation of the mind that, because starvation, crisis of food and shelter, there are several people who have been displaced, and that is the reason that there is this kind of crisis has unfolded. Besides that, inside Afghanistan, the developmental aid has also almost stopped because there are several developmental projects that are there in Afghanistan, which probably, may not see light of the day, for a long time in that matter. Besides that, also the banks are not working, so people are waiting for, days and days outside banks to actually get some money. And also the women and children situation is not that good there. And besides that, what the other countries are talking about is first the refugee crisis that is unfolding, that has started unfolding in several places, and the European Union has also said that incentivizing illegal migrants should not be done. So that is also important. Besides that, several security agencies are keeping an eye on how the soil of Afghanistan should not be used as a terror launch pad or again for the regrowth, revival of different terror outfits from there, and probably disturb the region's peace, especially South Asia, Central Asia. These are going to be the most affected if in case the terror outfits start getting more active there in Afghanistan. So definitely these are the major points of concern as of now. Besides that, it is an interim government. We have to understand that that time will tell us that how long will this government function, and especially how will this government function at this point of time when it has several challenges right on its face.
Right, Meghna. Well, many thanks for joining us there with those inputs. So we'll just have to wait and watch, as Meghna said, how the government functions, a number of priorities before it, as well as challenges, even as civilians seem to be finding their voice against interference by neighbors, external forces.
Very sensitive crossroads that the country finds itself in. Let us now look at the COVID situation from across the globe. If you look at the numbers first, more than 22.22 crore people have contracted COVID-19 so far. while over 19 crore, it's 19 crore 92 lakhs people who've recovered from the virus worldwide. The number of fatalities from virus has reached more than 45 lakh 99,000 globally. US continues to remain the worst affected by the virus, where over 4 crore 12 lakh cases have been reported so far. The death toll from the virus has crossed 6 lakh 69,000 in the country.
The World Health Organization has said that developed countries hoarding COVID-19 vaccines, therapeutics and other tools are prolonging the pandemic. Vaccines are being shipped to poor countries through the International COVAX facility, backed by the WHO and the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization. However, richer nations have come under fire for allegedly stockpiling COVID-19 jabs, as many underdeveloped nations with low inoculation rates and rising infections struggle to get supplies. A little over 230 million COVID-19 vaccine doses have been delivered to 139 countries under COVAX, Gavi data shows, against a target to secure 2 billion doses for lower income countries by the end of 2021.
It is the hoarding of these materials. We saw it in the beginning of the pandemic with PPE. But this is not just unfair, it's not just immoral, it's prolonging the pandemic. And it is resulting in people dying. And I think we need to be blunt. I think we need to be very clear that this is prolonging the pandemic. We have tools, we have enough vaccine around the world. If we had used the vaccine doses that were available differently, we would be in a very different situation right now globally. But it's the same thing with PPE. It's the same thing with the therapeutics.
In some other international news, a massive earthquake of 7.4 magnitude struck southern Mexico late on Tuesday night, causing buildings to rock and sway as far as Mexico City. People ran into streets after feeling the tremors. Civil protection authorities of Guerrero state said the quake, initially measured by the USGS at magnitude of about 7.4, caused rock falls and landslides onto roads. The quake also did damage to buildings in Acapulco. Mexico City Mayor Claudia Sheinbaum said there were no immediate reports of serious damage in the capital. In the Roma Sur neighborhood of Mexico City, lights went off. Residents huddled together in the rain, holding young children, pets, too worried to return to their homes in the dark.
And now let's find out what the World Wide Web is trending as far as news stories are concerned.
And our colleague Arun gets us all the updates. Good morning, Arun. Over to you.
Thank you, Shubhendu and Rukma, and good morning to all of you. Now, let me begin with the pink paper, Economic Times. Now, Economic Times has said that India to host G20 summit in 2023 for the first time. Now, Piyush Goyal appointed Sherpa for the groupings. Now, we know this fact that in 2023, India will be hosting G20 summit for the first time. Now, India is also part of the Troika group. That means the Troika consists of the preceding, the current and the upcoming G20 members. So in 2023, India will be holding this G20 summit, and Piyush Goyal has been appointed the Sherpa for this grouping. Now, second article I've picked up from the Indian Express. Now, it says that ahead of the COP26, Bhupendra Yadav pushes for flexibility to countries in deciding time frames for goals. Now, it is very much important to understand that in earlier COP meetings, the focus was on a selected timeline, a common timeline to achieve the climate goals or the environment goals. But over here, Bhupendra Yadav, the environment minister, is saying that according to the local problems, local solutions, and of course the local, affordability, the focus should be on achieving the environmental goals. So he's, pitching for a 5-year or 10-year time frame so that the climate goals or climate or environmental goals can be achieved by all the countries who are part of this COP meeting. So yes, he is trying to become more flexible. He's pitching for more flexible timelines for developing and developed countries. So this is being quoted in Indian Express. Third article is now from the Hindustan Times. Now, Hindustan Times says that Delhi, Noida reports surge in cases of viral fever among children, says doctor. Now, over here, the Hindustan Times has done an individual survey, primarily you can say has talked to some of the doctors in the hospitals in Delhi, Noida, and they found out that there is a surge in the pediatric department as far as viral fever or influenza is concerned. Now, we know this fact that in Firozabad, in Uttar Pradesh, in Firozabad, we have witnessed a lot of dengue cases going on over there. But now in Delhi, Noida, the OPD department, the doctors in various OPD department are saying that daily 30 cases are coming of children primarily, whereby they're witnessing a surge in the viral fever, and some of the cases are also related to dengue as well in Delhi, Noida. So this report is being done by Hindustan Times. Next article I picked up from Mint. Now, Mint says that Bitcoin sees flash crash on the day El Salvador adopts it as a legal tender. Now, we know this fact that El Salvador has become the first country primarily all across the world to adopt Bitcoin as a legal tender. That means it's a legal currency in El Salvador. But the day it adopted it as a legal tender, we have witnessed Bitcoin crashing by almost 10%. Although the market experts are saying that still the Bitcoin is in bull run, but many are predicting that since El Salvador is the first country to adopt it as a legal tender, many of them has indulged in profit booking, and that's the reason we have witnessed a crash primarily of 10% in Bitcoins on the day El Salvador adopted it as a legal tender. And last but not the least, this article I picked up from Times of India. Now, Times of India, the headline says the wait is over. Apple announces date of 2021's biggest event. Now, for all the Apple lovers, the wait is over. On 14th of September, Apple will be coming up, is holding a mega event whereby it is expected and widely speculated that Apple is going to launch its Apple 13 version, and of course the Apple Watch as well. Now, Apple 13 means Apple 13, Apple 13 Mini, Apple 13 Max, Apple 13 Pro Max. So all these versions are likely to be launched on 14th of September. So all the Apple lovers, you can tune in to the Apple websites. As far as Indian Standard Time is concerned, the event will be live at around 10:30 p.m. That's an Indian Standard Time. So yes, for the Apple lovers, the wait is over. If in case you're planning to upgrade to the other Apple versions as well. These are some of the big headlines that are trending on the social media websites. But for other news, back to you, Shubhendu and Rukma.
Well, thanks very much, Arun, for joining us there with that web review.
And let's now look at all the sporting action in our next segment, Sports Track.
We start off with the US Open, where Leylah Fernandez has reached the semi-finals. Just a day after turning 19, the Canadian ingenue continued her stunning run through the tournament, upsetting 5th-seeded Elina Svitolina. Fernandez showed all of her devastating power to win a tense tiebreak 6-3, 3-6, 7-6, 7-5. She is the youngest woman to reach the US Open singles semi-finals since Maria Sharapova in 2005, getting there a day after her 19th birthday. In another encounter, second seed Aryna Sabalenka of Belarus swept into her second Grand Slam semi-final in a row, defeating the 8th-seeded Barbara Krejcikova of the Czech Republic 6-1, 6-4. In the semi-final, Sabalenka will take on Leylah Fernandez of Canada. This will be the first meeting between Sabalenka and Fernandez. In the men's singles, second-seeded Daniil Medvedev ended qualifier Biotic Vandy Dan Schulp's battling run to reach the semi-finals and keep his bid for a maiden Grand Slam trophy alive. The Russian raced through to a 2-set lead, but Vandy Zandschulp, despite looking exhausted, hit back. The Dutchman, 25, saved a match point in the fourth set, but could not prevent Medvedev from winning 6-3, 6-0, 4-6, 7-5.
Let's now look at today's weather forecast.
The satellite picture shows a well-marked low-pressure area lying over southeast Madhya Pradesh and adjoining parts of North Vidarbha with associated cyclonic circulation up to middle tropospheric levels. And there's a shear zone that runs roughly in low and middle tropospheric levels, very likely to persist over South Peninsular India in the next 3 days. Fairly widespread to widespread rain with isolated heavy to very heavy falls likely over Madhya Maharashtra, Konkan, Gujarat from the 8th to the 11th. Isolated extremely heavy falls very likely over Madhya Maharashtra and Konkan today, Gujarat from today and tomorrow. Rainfall activity is very likely to continue with fairly widespread to widespread rain over most parts of northwest India till the 11th of this month. Let's take a look now at temperatures across the country.
And as we conclude, just a gentle reminder, the COVID numbers may be going down, but the pandemic is far from over. So do continue to follow all COVID appropriate behavior like wearing a mask, hand hygiene and social distancing. And also remember, do take your vaccine when your turn comes. It's safe and important.
Well, with that, it's a wrap on this edition of Breakfast News. As we go, we bring you interesting visuals like every day. And today, you can see how with buzzing music, flashing lights and revitalized energy, live catwalk shows and in-person fashion shows are back after a long COVID-19 halt. As we go, we leave you with these visuals which signify the beginning of coming back to normalcy. It's the first edition, in-person edition of New York Fashion Week in 18 months. Take a look. Namaskar.
Namaskar. Great day.